you can have this wonderful estate plan set up, and I've seen it. You think everything's set up. I had this situation where this guy was bragging at one of my workshops about the fact that he disinherited some of his kids. I'm listening to him and I'm like, I don't think you've disinherited anyone. You've redone your estate plan and named who you want to get the money, but you haven't changed any of your corresponding titles or beneficiary designations. Hi, my name is Annette Bau, your host of the Wealth Inside and Out podcast. I'm a certified financial planner and founder of the Millionaire Insider. For over 30 years, I have been advising and researching the top 1% of millionaires, and I am passionately obsessed with money, mindset, and the intersection of self-worth and net worth, and how the two connect and allow us to live fulfilled and wealthy lives on our terms. I'm a Midwestern girl who had a dream, began investing $25 a month 35 years ago, and today have a multi-million-dollar net worth. I teach the tried and true that only someone with over 3 decades of experience advising millionaires would know. This podcast is different, about much more than money. We talk about mindset, success, money blocks, worth barometer, and all aspects of money and topics from practical manifestation, along with real-world how-to and everything in between, with the goal of making your journey easier and more fun. Think of this as coffee, actually matcha tea, learning real-world common sense money and life advice from a BFF that you can start applying today. If you want to create a financially free life you love, you are in the right place, my friend. This is the Wealth Inside and Out podcast. So I want to welcome you to How to Avoid Probate. I'm Annette Bau, your host of the Wealth Inside and Out podcast. And today I have a special guest, Oscar Alvarez. So welcome, Oscar.
Well, thank you for having me, Annette.
Oh, it's great to have you. And I'm going to get back to you in 1 minute. Before we do that, I want to tell everyone about our free resource. It's our estate planning checklist. You can go to themillionaireinsider.com/EPC for estate planning checklist. This checklist is a guide that allows you to know the steps you need to take to make sure your entire estate plan is in order. And it is priceless. It's something that can save you a lot of time, money, and stress. So again, themillionaireinsider.com/EPC. One of the things I have found in my career is that when people have their estate plan in order, they spend less money, more money goes to their heirs, and they have less stress. They have less things to worry about. And I also have seen studies that show people live longer. So I encourage you to go download this free guide. Again, it's themillionaireinsider.com/EPC. You're going to love that resource. For today's show notes, you can go to themillionaireinsider.com/26. All the materials and intellectual property are copywritten by themillionaireseries.com. The information we provide is not intended to replace any advisor or specialist or to provide you any investment, estate, financial, tax, retirement, any planning, or healthcare advice. All participants agree to hold millionaireseries.com and its affiliates harmless for results achieved or not achieved. And that's especially important today because we are not attorneys. We are both CFPs. Oscar is also a certified divorce financial analyst. We're not attorneys, but we do a lot of estate planning in conjunction with attorneys. And so I want to be real clear on that. I want to give you just a little bit of insight on Oscar. I've known Oscar for several years. He was one of the advisors that I selected to become certified in my trainings. And I've gotten to know Oscar, and he's just an amazing guy. He's been married for 38 years? How many years have you been married, Oscar?
Going on 38 years now.
Oh my gosh. I mean, we're hitting 26, and I think that's a milestone. That is so amazing. He's got 2 sons. He went to West Point. He's a certified financial planner, as I mentioned. But he's also been a financial planner for over 30 years. So welcome to the 30-year club. But one of the things that I love about Oscar is that he's very knowledgeable and he's very real world, but he also brings it down to make it easy to understand and to apply. And I think one of the things that I find with a lot of financial advisors is they're so smart, but when it comes to practical application, I'm like, what? Wait a minute, like, what did you say? Like, I can't even follow it. And I've been an advisor for 35 years. So the one thing you're going to love today in talking with Oscar is you're going to see how he has real world practical experience that is so important, especially when it comes to a topic like probate and estate planning. So, again, I want to welcome you. So, let's begin, Oscar, by talking about what is probate. Can you just give a bigger picture view for our listeners?
Yes. So probate, it's really a legal process and it's designed to help an estate distribute their assets to the heirs, beneficiaries, or to ensure that the debts are paid by the estate if the estate owes any debts. So it's a legal process and it's usually done through the court system. What you have to understand, though, is every state is different and every municipality is different. So you have to make sure you understand what the rules are for your particular location. I think probate gets a bad name. It is kind of a checks and balances, but honestly, if you can avoid it, it would just save you a lot of time and headache, and which we'll talk about a little bit more.
I was in a meeting once, and the attorney said when our clients left, she said, they're lucky they have you. They're getting their estate plan in order. She said, a significant portion of our revenue from this firm is probate. And it's like an annuity income stream. And I remember thinking, isn't that crazy? Because attorneys are making so much money from it. I have a situation that I'm working right now where they spent thousands, tens of thousands of dollars to get their estate plan in order, and nothing is set up correctly. Their ownership isn't set up. Their beneficiary isn't set up. I mean, it's just a mess. Even their insurance, they went to the pain of getting an irrevocable insurance trust known as an ILET. It's not funded. They're not doing crummy notices. I mean, it is like, and then I said to the attorney, I said, I mean, they went to all this work to do it. He goes, yeah, you just can't make clients do it. And I'm thinking in the back of my mind, most clients don't even know what to do. And
Right.
this is what I want to dive into. So people are getting real world knowledge. Recently, I heard a person say, we just did our estate plan. And I said, that's great. She goes, yeah, it's so nice knowing everything's taken care of. And I said, wait. Let's talk about that. So, okay, there are advantages of having your estate plan done, but can we talk for 1 minute about how do cars pass? Do they pass by what it says in your trust or they pass by title? They pass by title. Your home passes by title. Your bank account is going to pass by title, or like even if it's a payable on death, that's then beneficiary, but it's still part of the title. Your life insurance is going to pass by beneficiary. Your annuities are going to pass via the beneficiary. So you can have this wonderful estate plan set up, and I've seen it. You think everything's set up. I had this situation where this guy was bragging at one of my workshops about the fact that he disinherited some of his kids. I'm listening to him and I'm like, I don't think you've disinherited anyone. You've redone your estate plan and named who you want to get the money, but you haven't changed any of your corresponding titles or beneficiary designations. IRAs pass via beneficiary. So some of your personal assets and assets that maybe don't have a title that are just in your name will pass via your estate plan. But is there anything you want to add to that, Oscar?
You're right. And I think one of the things that I come across quite a bit is when people bring their trust documents in, what I find is they've got it all set up, but they've never funded it. And which means when we say funded it, did you actually go in and change the bank accounts for the trust name? Did you actually change the beneficiaries on your IRAs, 401ks? Did you do all those things that you said you wanted done in your trust? And 9 out of 10 times, people just take the book and take it home and don't do anything else after that.
Well, and what I find, because we're so anal about it and we have an entire process for it, is if you don't have the process, you got to find somebody that'll help you.
Right.
And I think one of the things that I hate to say attorneys would intentionally do that, but it's like there's not a major incentive for them getting it done, because if it doesn't get done, they're going to do a probate where they make a lot more money. And so again, I'm not saying that that's intentional, even though in this one law firm, it was kind of like they were joking around about how much money they were making because of it. It's a real serious matter because you're talking thousands, tens of thousands of dollars, even in the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it's something to be aware of. So let's start with kind of a bigger picture of the downsides of probate, because I get that it's an accounting and it has some advantages, but let's talk about the downsides. What are some of the downsides that you see?
Well, probably the biggest ones are first the cost. And if you think about it, if you pass away and things are not in order, the court tape basically jumps in. Well, now you're paying court costs, you're paying an administrative fee, you might be paying some sort of executor fee. They will assign different people to do different things, and you don't want to pay those fees. But that may be part of the problem when you allow those kind of things to happen. So, one is the cost. The second thing is the complexity. And some people have a simple estate, some people have more complex estates. And especially if you get into like if you got a vacation home in one state and your residence in another state, all those things become more complicated. And if things aren't in order, guess what? You're paying somebody, some administrator or an assigned executor to come by and then try to figure all that out. And that's going to all cost a lot of money. And then the third thing is time. And so now you're talking about how long is this going to take? Most of the time when I see people with complex estates, we're talking 2 or 3 years before it gets cleared up. That's if they're lucky. Even a simple estate with just like a home and a few accounts takes a year. So for the person who has to be the executor, especially if it's one of your children, you're talking about a lot of time and energy for them to be able to put in to get this thing cleared up. And then think about it from the standpoint as an additional cost, if it's one of your children doing this and they live in another state, guess what? They're either going to have to fly back and forth, or they're going to have to hire a lawyer to do it all for them in the state that you resided in. So now you have that extra cost and extra hassle, and especially for the children. And then lastly, all this takes time. And guess what? All your assets are sitting there waiting to be distributed. And your children and heirs or whoever your beneficiaries are, it may be years before they see that money.
Yeah. Well, and I would just add to that public record. It's a public process, and it means anyone can get the details. So you can go down to the courthouse and find out exactly how much money somebody has, what assets they have. And for many of us, we want that privacy. In fact, my clients, that's probably one of the main reasons they want to avoid it. So I think that's important. And then one of the things, just to add on to what you said, when you have homes in different states, you don't get one probate, you get two. You probate it in the state you reside as well as in the state where your second home is. And so it's really important that you understand it. And also, I had a woman in my class who, this is something that I could like scratch my fingernails down a chalkboard whenever I hear, but it's like her husband handled everything. And it's like, everything's taken care of. He's handled it. And that's always like, oh my gosh. It's like he may when he's alive, but who's going to handle it when he's not here? Right. And if you don't know anything that's going on, well, make a long story short, he passed away and everything's handled, but it wasn't. She didn't know where anything was. She does a probate, gets through it. 2 years later, the probate's closed. She gets through it and she finds the shoebox in the back of the closet with everything. A copy of his will, a copy of, which I think they had another copy of the will, but life insurance policies, bearer bonds, instructions. Oh, wow. She had to open up another probate. It cost her 3 times the amount of money, and it was just a nightmare. So making sure you've got things taken care of, and at least you have an idea and you've got somebody else that does, is a really important aspect of estate planning. Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, it's important for both parties to know what's going on. I had a client that the husband passed away and he took care of all the finances, kind of like that simple rule. And she had no idea that he had LLCs inside of LLCs. And he had LLCs from, I think it was Colorado, Arizona, wherever it's cheap to make an LLC. I mean, it was just so complicated. They had to hire a lawyer to get it all deciphered, which cost several $1,000s just to figure out what it was that they had and where they had it.
Well, and let me add to this. So one of my clients just recently got this check and it said unclaimed money. And I'm like, don't do anything with it. And I said, I went into panic mode. I go, she goes, I filled out this form. And I said, okay, what's 101 when you get something? Now, this is what's weird is because all my clients, they get something, they are sending it to me, having me review it. She goes, no, it looked really official. And I'm like, oh my God. And so she gets this check and I said, don't do anything with it. Send me everything. Well, I looked at it and it did look official. Turns out the state of Arizona, for whatever reason, found out that she had an asset that she had not claimed. They sent it to her and, now she gets it back. Every state has it, unclaimed property. And several years ago, it was 7 trillion. I'm sure now it's probably 30 or 40 trillion. of unclaimed money. And you can actually go to your state to the unclaimed property website, and you just have to look it up for your state and go in and put your information in and find out if you have unclaimed assets. But when you don't go through probate, this is something that can happen. I'm not saying that there aren't assets that get lost when you go through probate, because if you don't have a balance sheet, sometimes people forget about assets. But the reality of it is just keeping on top of all that is so important.
Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about ways in which you can avoid probate.
Well, I think the first way and the easiest way is to create a trust. But as I said earlier, make sure you fund the trust. And basically what the trust does is it allows for the privacy of your family to take care of everything, and everything gets distributed within the family, however it is you've designated. But a living trust is probably the best way to accomplish that. Now, the living trust, when you set it up, you can change it at any point while you're still alive. However, once you pass, everything's set in stone and everything goes by whatever it is you designated in the trust. But that's probably the best and easiest way to take care of it, I think. It's especially important if you're trying to leave assets for maybe a disabled child or something like that, then there's special trusts for that. But basically, if you're going to distribute everything immediately, a trust is an easy way to do it. It's even more important if you need to stretch things out because of some special family situation.
And if I can just add in there, and this is kind of a side note on estate planning as compared to just probate. If you want to have creditor protection for the assets that go to your kids, you got to have two trustees. You can have the child that is the beneficiary, but you got to name someone else. There's got to be two trustees in there to be able to get creditor protection. But that's something that is just an easy way to make sure your assets are protected if, unfortunately, your child gets sued or something happens. So just FYI. So are there other ways to avoid probate, Oscar?
Yes. So what I talk to a lot of my clients about is really a lot of the simple things. You mentioned it a little bit earlier about transfer on death. So, and I'll just give you an example. So if you have bank accounts or brokerage accounts, they generally there's no place to designate a beneficiary or an heir. So what you do is you put transfer on death. And what that means is, and some people call it paid on death, what that means is that when that person passes, it immediately goes to whoever it is you've indicated. And that's probably one of the simplest ways to take care of simple things like bank accounts, brokerage accounts, things that don't have beneficiaries. Now, you have things that do have beneficiaries. So you have IRAs, 401ks, life insurance, annuities, all these things, you have to establish a beneficiary. And so the beneficiary just goes straight to the beneficiary. Even if your will, and this is an important note, if your will says it's going to be split 50-50 between two people, but your beneficiary on your life insurance, your 401k, IRAs, whatever, if it has somebody else's name, now you're in trouble because they're going to send it to the person that you indicated is the beneficiary. Doesn't matter what your will or your trust says, they're sending it to the beneficiary that you have established on the account. So that's an important note to keep in mind. Real estate's another one that I talk to a lot of my clients about. For whatever reason, like I said, people want to avoid probate for lots of different reasons. But the other one is people are, for some reason, scared the government's going to take their house. Well, the easy way to avoid that is if the house is paid for, you can do transfer on death with real estate. It's very simple. It is changing the deed, and we just call it a transfer on death deed. That's basically what it's called. And every state has it, but you just have to understand what the rules are for that state, because every state can be a little bit different. One of the other things to think about as well is what's called a small estate affidavit. Now, a small estate affidavit is a little bit different, but I want you to just try to think through this process. If all my accounts have either a beneficiary or a transfer on death, I've got my house that's got a transfer on death, then there's really very little left in my estate that needs to be dealt with. And so what that allows is for the small estate affidavit to come in. Now, you got to check with your state because every state's different. In Virginia, which is where I'm at, a small estate is considered anything under $50,000. In North Carolina, it's $20,000 or $30,000, depending on the situation. In Texas, where my folks live, it's $25,000. So every state is different. However, if you listen to what we're talking about, you put these transfer on death, you put these beneficiaries in place, you'll end up taking care of most everything that if you don't have a trust, you could go through probate, but it'll be a small estate affidavit. And guess what? It's just like that. It doesn't
Mhm.
take any time at all.
So
The
that would work
probably
with somebody who doesn't have a lot of assets.
right. And that works very well for people who have very little in assets and it's not complicated.
Mhm.
And that's just an easy way to do it. The next big thing is what I call the joint things. And these are, and most people, when a couple, let's just say, they open a bank account, they inadvertently, not realizing that they're doing this, but they're doing what's called a joint tenant with rights of survivorship. That means they open the bank account in both their names, and should one of them pass, the account immediately goes to the surviving spouse. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. It happens very easily. And that's important just from the standpoint of you want to make sure it's titled correctly. But here's the trick, and this is where most people forget, is that once the first spouse passes, the second spouse needs to put a TOD with that bank account, because if that second spouse passes, the bank's going to freeze the account. And so now whoever the executor is going to have to go through this whole process with the court system in order to even access the bank account. So you want to make sure when you either put when you have joint tenant with rights of survivorship, that the second spouse, after the first spouse has passed, changes that to transfer on death or payable upon death.
Well, and ideally you have that in the trust. So it's not even an
Correct.
issue, because then it's not an issue. But then isn't there also community property with right of survivorship if you're in a community property
Yes,
state?
it's basically the same thing.
Yeah, but that's so important. And obviously, if you don't have a lot of assets, then it may not matter. But one of the things I've seen is where somebody they've been married, they had assets, joint tenants with right of survivorship, one partner dies, then they get remarried. They've got their will, making sure their kids are taken care of. And I actually have a situation right now like this, which a woman that was referred to me, and it's just a nightmare because the second wife is her age. So it's unlikely she's going to die anytime in the near future. And make a long story short, this like $50 million property has been left to the stepmother. She's giving a lot of the income to her kids, but none to his. What I've seen a lot in my career is where people own it, joint tenants, and they're like, okay, they have I love you will. And then they die, they get remarried, they put the same title on it. And a lot of times those people leave more money to their children than they do to the other kids. And especially if there's other involvements, like they don't like the ex or something like that, it's just a nightmare. So that is something really critical.
Right. And I'm a big advocate for when it's a second marriage, especially if there's more children involved, to do the trust and spell it out right from the get-go, because the most of the time you see people in court, it's because they're fighting over assets because it's a second marriage and things were not done correctly. And some people just get disinherited by accident.
Yeah.
And that's not what you want. That's why
especially your kids. I mean, you worked so hard to get the money and then you don't. Now, I want to just clarify one thing. A lot of times people think a will or a pour over will avoid probate. It does not. It allows you to pour over the assets that aren't titled right into your trust, but you still go through probate. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Oscar.
No, that's absolutely correct.
Yeah, it's absolutely huge. So is there anything else that you want to share about probate? We've covered a lot of things, and this has been really helpful, I think, to just get a better understanding of it.
My big thing is just go ahead and do the trust. I like trust. I think it's important to do a trust. But that way you can spell everything out. And the biggest thing is it's going to save your kids time, energy, and most of all, stress. If you even have a small estate that you say, well, it's not that big, the cost to do the trust versus the cost of going through probate will probably be the same. You'll end up saving money if you just do the trust, in my opinion. And just do the trust and save everybody the heartache and the headache and the time that it would take to go through probate.
Yeah. And if I can just add a couple of things. So we do a process when somebody gets an estate plan where we track every asset and we're doing balance sheets. So we have an updated listing of assets for every client. I have a client that I've been working with for probably over 20 years, and we've done estate plans. They've revised them. And about every 5 years, we just go and relook at the assets just to make sure, right? We don't want any surprises. And it was so funny, this particular situation, the person's like, it's all taken care of. Don't worry about it. And I'm like, sorry, it doesn't work. I just want to look at it. Well, guess what? We found that their new house had not been put into the trust. And they had a bank account that had over $200,000 that had not been put in the trust. What was so interesting is I think a lot of times people think like, oh, yeah, it's all taken care of because they've done it once, but you need to be looking at that regularly. Now, I don't know if you have we recommend at least every 5 years, but do you have any recommendation on that?
I try to do mine every 3 or 4 years.
Okay. So, and that's even better. Now, granted, we are looking at the balance sheet, and if we see any new assets, then we immediately look at them. So we already kind of know the assets. But I think the other issue that I see sometimes happens is, in fact, I just saw it where a person went and bought this investment, and it was a odd investment because it was like an offering. So it wasn't like a normal one where it would have been bought through, say, us or some advisor. And I said, oh, how's that titled? And the person titled in their name. And I said, wait a minute, why didn't you put that in the trust? Oh, I can do that. You've got to make sure, like if you're buying any asset, I don't care what it is, and you don't know how to title it. Oh, just this morning, I had to name a beneficiary designation on one of the companies that I do business with. And it was so funny. It was my husband. Now he knows this stuff. And he's like, oh, should I be the beneficiary? I'm like, no, our trust. So it happens all the time, even to someone like us that does this all the time. So I just want people to be aware of that. So is there anything else that you want our listeners to leave with other than they need to get their estate plan in order? And if they do have assets, to create a trust?
The last thing is, even once you have it all done, you definitely need to review it periodically. 3 years, 5 years, it needs to be reviewed because things change, or you might change your mind about something. You need to review it. Just don't let it sit there. I had a client who brought his trust in, and he said they hadn't opened it since the day they made it 12 years ago. It need to be reviewed.
I got to leave with one funny story. So I'm in this workshop and I meet this woman, and she's telling me, everything that's going on and stuff. And so I said, well, I just need to see your documents. No, it's all okay. I got to see your documents. And so we get in the meeting and I said, so who is Dick Smith? And she's like, oh, he was our best friend like 30 years ago. But, he's like a complete alcoholic, drug addict. He's been in and out of rehab. I go, how do you feel about him making financial decisions on your multi-million-dollar estate? She goes, what do you mean? I go, he's the co-trustee if something happens to your husband. She about fell off her chair. And see, that's why you got to keep reviewing that and make sure things are taken care of. And as well as making sure all your powers of attorneys, medical directives. Right. If you go download the estate planning checklist at themillionaireinsider.com/EPC, that lists everything you need to have and that you need to keep updated to make sure that you're in line with what you need to do. So I want to thank you so much, Oscar. Did you have anything else to add?
Yeah, one last thing I'd like to add is make sure whoever the beneficiaries are, that they have a copy of your trust, that there's no surprises, and especially if you're making changes. I think open transparency, communication with the heirs is important, and it avoids a lot of headaches down the road.
And if you're really concerned about that, maybe you have the wrong person named, or you make sure you have your attorney or your CPA. And then last but not least, one other thing you can do in your estate plan, just a little note, you can also have a trust protector. So interestingly enough, our trust protector is my securities attorney. And he's like, what? And I go, he'd be great, right? Because he knows, like, he'll see red flags faster than anyone. And so you can also do that. Now, granted, that would be for somebody who has a little bit larger of a estate. But, all of a sudden you start having millions of dollars. If that happens to be you want to make sure those things are taken care of. So thank you so much for this insight. And now you know how to avoid probate. So you just need to go do it. So I want to thank you so much for joining us on how to avoid probate.
Thank you for having me, Annette.
If you love the content of this podcast, please follow and subscribe to our channel so you get notified of episodes, and also give us a 5-star review and share a comment. We really appreciate it. Congratulations on taking another step to create a financially free life you love. If you're not sure about your financial future or that it's in order, or you are ready to stop worrying about money, or possibly the fear of becoming a bag lady, ending up broke in retirement, or you simply are ready to know your financial house is in order so that you can have a bright financial future, please go to themillionaireinsider.com/ NSF. And that doesn't stand for non-sufficient funds. It stands for Next Step Finance. It's the next best step of what you need to do so you can avoid an NSF notice in your future. Again, themillionaireinsider.com/NSF. The number of women who were not broke or poor while working or married is staggering. The entire mission of the Wealth Inside and Out podcast is to ensure you have the information for you, your family, your friends, anyone who's willing to listen to it and apply it so that you can create a financially free life you love. Again, themillionaireinsider.com/NSF. Until our next episode, take one action that will help you create a financially free life you love. I'm Annette Ba'u, your host. All international copyrights are reserved. Bye for now.